It wasn't entirely uncommon to see various stores come and go along our local strip mall. In fact, I recall purchasing a grill from Armstrong's Hardware in the same building that had been a Chinese buffet only a month prior. The stores came and they went, a tale of another family unable to make ends meet. Not much changed around the Oakfield area outside of the carousel of businesses. The local skate park remained dead, and the bowling alley had become a hotspot for purchasing shitty weed and laced coke. School numbers had remained on the decline since the turn of the century, as families filed out one after the other. Anyways, I suppose that's a good enough history lesson on the quaint town of Oakfield, Illinois. A once promising city that would be lucky to be classified as a village now. Here I am, once a man, lucky to be classified as a bum now. I'd made a decent living and a good name for myself during my tenure at the Oakfield Cafe. The food wasn't necessarily fancy, but that's okay. It brought the town comfort, good old-fashioned soul food. However, things took a turn during COVID, and we were forced to shut the place down. I've been unable to hold down anything ever since, outside of the occasional freelance job. The morning I happened upon Riley's Fungin had been like many which had come before it. In fact, it had seemed markedly better. The air was cool and crisp. The fall was easing in and washing out the heat of a long, dry summer. A perfect day for some job hunting. My parents had always told me that it's better to apply in person than online, so that's exactly what I did. I threw on my cleanest white shirt. All the others had paint stains from previous jobs, and a pair of blue jeans, and out I went. I had been actively avoiding applying at the bowling alley, so I decided to see if any new stores popped up at the strip mall since my last visit. My beat-up old Civic bounced and lurched along the decaying roads, fighting the monstrous potholes along the entrance of the mall's parking lot. In total, the row of buildings could house 5 stores, though it seemed one of them always remained vacant. Starting from the left was the longest tenured of the 5, a laundromat which never seemed to have an employee present. No dice. Next to that was Blue's Supermarket, which probably accounted for 90% of the traffic in the mall. Unfortunately, I'd already applied there at least half a dozen times and had yet to hear anything back. Might be worth another shot. Then, right there in the middle was exactly what I'd hoped for. A new store, a new possibility for employment. Riley's Fungin, the scarlet-colored sign read. Weird name, but it was worth a shot. The door to my Civic squealed in protest as I pushed it open and slid out. I peered up at the sign with the funny name again, before pushing the door shut and making my way to the building. I wish I could say that I had felt some sort of the ominous foreboding as I walked up to Riley's Fungin, but rather it was a sort of cautious optimism. Truthfully, I felt great, like I'd already got the job offer and my financial burdens would soon be a thing of the past. Those dreams were promptly crumbled up and shot into outer space as soon as I made my way inside. A Victorian-esque couch, the color of crimson, sat lonely in the middle of the vacant room. Several lamps, which hung from the wall, cast a golden hue over the dark wooden floors. The darkness seemed absolute outside of the lamp's glow. All the windows were shrouded by curtains which matched the couch's red hue. As odd as it all seemed, it was somewhat comforting. My footsteps fell especially loudly in the empty room. This may sound weird, but at that moment I was sure that I was the only soul in the room. As I came closer to the red couch, I noticed a short mahogany desk sat directly in front of it. Its top was no more than a foot above the floor. A metal box stood in the middle of the desk, with a yellow button protruding from the top. "Hello?" My voice echoed much like my footsteps had. Nobody answered. Against any rational judgment, I decided to take a seat. Almost instantly, 2 more lamps directly in front of me turned on, revealing a chalkboard. In perfect cursive, it read, "Welcome to Riley's Fungin, where your wish is our command. Ask the box anything and press the button. Remember, it all comes with a price." The creeps had thoroughly settled in by this point. My heart had begun pounding furiously. What did any of it mean? Anything? I mean, really, anything? I sat dumbfounded on that couch for a while, reading its message repeatedly. It all comes with a price, I thought, all too aware of the empty wallet sitting in my pocket. Though, even then, I had a feeling that wasn't the kind of price it meant. "Hello?" I called out once more, hoping somebody, anybody would come clarify what this all meant. Obviously, it couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of gag store for some asshole's YouTube channel or TikTok. I looked around the room again, studying the shadows between the lamp's glow. No matter how long I looked into those shadows, no matter how long I let my eyes adjust to that darkness, they couldn't seem to penetrate through that pitch black. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of the fact that I was sitting alone in a dark room of a place called Riley's Function. Maybe people in horror movies aren't as dumb as people make them out to be. Or maybe I'm just the perfect person to play such a role. Once again, against any rational thought, I decided to press the button. As my finger lifted from the glowing button, I went still, expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows and either snatch me up or laugh and scream that I had just been pranked. Neither happened. I returned my gaze to the chalkboard. "Ask the box anything," it said. As greedy as this makes me sound, it took little time for me to decide on my wish. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. "I need $800, please," I said. At first, nothing happened. I sat there feeling like an idiot, getting ready to hop up from the couch and continue my job search elsewhere. Then, from one of those inky shadows in the corner of the room, I could hear the squeal of a door on its rusted hinges. I froze. A tall, slender figure began to materialize through the darkness. I wanted to bolt so badly, but it felt as though my body was frozen in time. A man, or what I assume was a man, emerged from the shadows. He was adorned in a black suit with matching black pants. He wore a mask over his face, a mask which looked like it was straight from a Victorian masquerade party. The mask had a long, skinny nose and no mouth. Its eyes appeared to be sewn shut. In his hand was a large silver platter with a dome concealing its contents. He walked swiftly and without hesitation. At once, he stood directly over me, his gaze never meeting my own. He lifted the platter's sparkling dome. Upon it were 8 perfect stacks of $100 bills and a razor. As my shaky hands drew near my prospective rent funds, the man raised his hand like a cross guard trying to stop a car. Instead, he lifted the razor. I looked at the razor and then at him, though he seemed to be fixated on something beyond me. "What do I do with it?" I asked, cringing at the weakness of my cracking voice. I turned my gaze back to the chalkboard, which revealed a new message. "Shave one of your eyebrows off," it said. "That's it?" I asked the man, though I was sure he wouldn't answer. If I had to walk around for a month or so looking like an idiot, at least I'd have an apartment to hide in the meantime. I plucked the razor from his gloved hand and promptly erased of my eyebrows. I set the razor back on the platter when I was done and scooped up the stacks of bills. My feet were unsteady as I walked haphazardly to the door, looking back one more time before thanking the silent man and leaving. Rent was paid on time that month. My insides felt slimy and sick for a while after using the services of Riley's Function, though I wish I could say that feeling had stopped me from ever returning. Over the following months I had returned for various things, ranging from more help with my financial burdens or the occasional steak dinners. All of the requests had remained fairly innocent. Once I had to shave my entire head bald, another time they made me flip my eyelids open, though sometimes they were a bit more ominous. Once I had to smash one of my fingers with a hammer, which had broken it, though the money I got was able to pay for a doctor's visit and more. They'd also made me pull one of my teeth after I requested a little help in the dating scene, but it was more than worth it after my recent influx of female visitors. Truthfully, life was good, but as it was programmed in my lizard brain, humans simply cannot let a good thing be. I figured if I got one big lump sum that I would never have to return to the Function, but I had to be smart, I had to be. If I asked for $1 million, could you imagine what horrible shit they'd make me do? I couldn't let that happen. I needed help. The trees were barren at this point, and a thin layer of sleet had taken up residence on the sidewalk leading to my grandmother's home. She was more than excited to see her seldom present grandson knocking at the front door. Without hesitation, she allowed me in. By the time I explained to her what Riley's Function was all about, I felt a little guilty. I mean, I couldn't be the one taking that sort of punishment, you know. Besides, she wasn't going to be around for much longer anyways. After pleading with her for what felt like eternity, I'm surprised she didn't die of old age by how long that conversation took, though she finally agreed to join me on a visit to the place, none the wiser, of course. Perhaps it's that dementia-riddled part of their brain that steals any sort of reasoning. Truly, had anyone else heard the ridiculous shit I was spewing, they'd have me thrown in the loony bin. But not my Meemaw. No, sir. She was just as eager as I was to sit on that crimson couch as I was. "So, how do I do this?" she croaked, looking around suspiciously at the shadows surrounding us. I nudged at her ribs and pointed at the button. "Just press that and say what I told you," I spat, but added gently, "Just think of what we can do with all that money." She smiled at me, a worn, wrinkly smile. She reached a frail hand out to the button and pressed it. "Yes, I would like—" She trailed off, a worried look spreading over her ragged face. "I would like $5 million. I cringed at how foolish she sounded, how unaware she was at the power this place held. Suddenly she slumped over and began to convulse. I jumped up. "What the fuck?" I yelped, peering over at the chalkboard. Scribbled on the board were two words, two simple words. "Kill him." When I returned my gaze to my grandma, she had vanished. The room was entirely still, entirely silent. I stood there for a minute, then two, before something in the shadows had caught my eye. Something horrible, something grisly. Its limbs bent and twisted at terrible, awkward angles, cracking and popping as the creature drew closer to me. It moved slowly, watching me from the perfect shroud of darkness. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it climbed to the heavens, skittering with amazing speed along the ceiling. My legs began buckling as I tried helplessly to get away from the thing. I fell to my knees and called out for my grandma, calling for help, for anyone to save me from this monster. Then, from the darkness overhead, emerged a knobby, veined hand with a wedding ring on one of its twisted fingers. "Don't worry, I'm here," my grandma's voice called from the darkness. Then, from the pool of black, her face emerged. Her jaw hung limp, revealing a gaping mouth filled with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its eyes were pulled back into huge black ovals like a cartoonish depiction of an alien. Beyond those rows of teeth emanated the smell of 1,000 corpses. At this, a surge of adrenaline brought my gelatinous legs back to life as I pushed my way back out into the world, back to my apartment. I'm not sure how long I've been held up here since the day the Fungeon turned my grandma into an otherworldly creature. Weeks, months, maybe. Every time I think of leaving the house, I can hear something skittering just outside my window, just outside my sight. I can hear her sometimes, but she only ever says the same thing. Everything comes with a price. I decided to do a little urban exploring to get my mind off my mother-in-law's cancer. She had been sick for half a decade, and it had made home life dreary. I was there for my wife, but there was only so much I could do, comfort her, as she was always one to deal with this stuff on her own. You can only get told to fuck off so many times before you start to take the advice. My wife liked company but preferred to grieve on her own as she felt it fostered self-sufficiency, whether I agreed or not. This did give me time to pursue my own hobbies, such as acting like exploring abandoned buildings like I was 15 again. I hopped over the rusted gate and ran into the decrepit building to avoid any chance of getting caught. I'm not sure why my interests became so morbid after her mum got ill. Maybe this was my subconscious way of coping. Perhaps my mother-in-law meant more to me than I realized. Whatever the reason, I had gotten past the point being afraid of anything and felt I had to keep upping the stakes of my explorations to keep myself from thinking too much. So on I went to use danger as a form of escapism. I was looking through rooms in order to find any freaky mysteries buried by the hospital to give this more of a video game vibe. I managed to break open what looked like an old chief of medicine's office. Just the normal stuff. Carved pentagrams, swastikas, insults, 666 and a bunch of other symbols that looked like they came from an 80s metal album. A bit disappointed, I decided to sit for a bit. Many of these buildings didn't scare me at all, and I needed a break as I came here straight from work and haven't had time to rest or eat. I've explored enough to know where the most important secrets in these places hide. It all came through the heart of the facility. Where the heart of the building was depended on the specific facility. Factories were a mystery due to the excessive number of nooks and crannies. Homes, despite their size, might have been worse. With schools and offices, you just had to search the right desk. But hospitals were always the chief of medicine's office. I guess there were too many unstable patients to put it anywhere else. Scrambling through files, I was about to just head home when I saw something interesting. I picked up a folder with the symbol of a circle and lines standing around it. I removed a document, and from what I read, there happened to be a special group in this hospital. A cult, I figured. There was a makeshift map on the back, which made me think there must have been something pretty cool in this room. I didn't find this in the trash. It was in a drawer I had to jimmy open, which told this might have been an urban explorer's dream come true. You learn fast what is useful. I took a map of the hospital and followed the instructions from the document, which led me to the 3rd floor, towards the end of the hallway. I made my way to the destination only to find a wall. Thinking the wall might be hollow, I began to punch and hit the wall with anything I could find. However, the wall was solid, with no sign of paint or anything that would imply something used to be here. That didn't stop me, as I have become an expert on finding hidden entrances. One of the reasons I brought the map was to navigate these hard-to-find areas. I figured the entrance to this room might have been on the other side near the stairwell. I went around to the stairs and found that the room on the other side of the building. There was a secret entrance on the side of the stairs opposite the hallway I was in. Wanting to feel the thrill of uncovering a cool conspiracy, I climbed in the entrance, hoping I might make a difference in this world. I found myself in a pitch-black room that smelled like a large janitor's closet. I searched around until I found a sign of light, or a breeze that could indicate a way out. I found a door and made my way out, and found myself in what felt like a small gymnasium. I heard a small yelp and headed for the sound. I had been exploring so much that stuff that should have terrified me, such as screams or signs of crimes, only intrigued me and pushed me forward. I turned a corner to find a room with a small light in it. I shoved my way in like I'd been there before. I saw a small group of people, some men and some women, who were surrounding a shaking patient. I wondered if I walked into one of those live procedures that med students would watch. For a brief moment, I thought I entered a part of the hospital that was still in operation and was about to leave when I noticed that the patient was awake. I yelped, causing the group to turn around. I started to run, but the door slammed shut with the leader standing right behind me. "You can't leave yet." "What? "Please have a seat." As he turned to walk away, a seat materialized behind him. Not knowing what to do, I sat, hoping that if I cooperated, I wouldn't be in the patient's place. I could maybe leave and call the authorities. "I know what this looks like. You think we're monsters who are getting a rocks watching a man suffer. A cult of hedonists with no motive but smile in the face of another's pain. I assure you we're not monsters and we don't enjoy this. We have to do this." "So you're addicted?" "The world depends on this man's suffering." I wanted to run for the hills, but thought I wouldn't get very far. I sat still, trying not to panic. I know it's crazy, but we have seen things. As bad as the world is, if we don't keep this man in pain, the chaos revealed will be so much worse. And it doesn't happen fast. It will be a gradual turn. It won't be an explosion, more like a corrosion. A steady stream of misevents that eventually leads to our destruction. "Why do you think this? How does this work?" I say, trying to stall as long as I can. It's difficult to explain, but every person, whether it be positive or negative, releases energy. The energy of an individual interacts with another's energy, which creates cohesion or friction that keeps the world in balance. This is why some people love each other, while some that can't stand a person. Every unlikable person, as well as every town favorite, serves a purpose. That being said, most people don't have enough energy to have a noticeable effect on their own. Their energy just comes off as normal human interaction, and the ones who are deemed more emotional and likable cause a small reaction and are mixed in the sea of energy created by every person. However, some people produce enough energy to really make difference. Cult leaders, dictators, and visionaries of all stripes can use that energy to control the wave of energy. This doesn't worry us, as most rarely ever discover their abilities, but a very rare few produces enough to affect the world, all on their own. For these people, their thoughts and opinions don't just carry more weight, but creates a force that doesn't require appealing to society's emotions. Their energy affects the abstract energy of others and create a domino effect of influence which can be mirrored by anyone without having any idea they are being influenced. It is almost like a possession. The ones who have the righteous religious status must be worshipped, while the ones who are malevolent must be despised, for this creates a balance of good and evil that keeps us a moral check. The ones who the most energy is not able to control it, it must be controlled for them. This is David Eklund. He is what we call a negative unified force. His torture brings stability that we otherwise wouldn't have. What stability? The world is in chaos. If this were real, I think you guys found the wrong person. The level of chaos we'd have without this man's pain would be astounding. You think the political chaos is bad now? Imagine riots that can actually bring down countries. Imagine what comes up after is basically a black hole that just destroys. No one would believe in anything anymore. Everything would be about trying to destroy. What we have now is not chaos. How do you know this? This is ready. We've all had experiences with our doubt. This wouldn't just happen all at once. It always starts out with a relatively small incident. Maybe someone gets shot. Maybe his family or friends take exception to that and attempt revenge. Maybe that retaliation hits the wrong person, causing a political group to think it was a hate crime, which in turn causes a bit of protests, which causes an extremist group to act out, leading to riots from the protesters. Maybe the protesters get careless and injure a general in the crowd. Maybe this causes the police and military to get involved. This chaos would be much worse than what we've experienced the last few decades. This is a huge claim. Come on, we aren't monsters. We've all wanted this man to be free, but have experienced some of these mild calamities. There just isn't a way around it. I don't know. I hear a woman interject. I came here 2 years ago. I rescued him and took him to a shelter. I got a call from my mother that my sister had been committed. My sister has always had problems, so I figured it was a coincidence. My sister tried to eat one of the nurses, and she didn't make it. So my sister was put on trial. She originally got a light sentence due to her mental state, but was changed to the death penalty the next day. We were all confused at the sudden change of heart, but the judge wouldn't hear it. He said this cultish behavior has to stop. They put her to death the next week. This made my sister's case the fastest execution in modern US history. This caused an extremist church to bomb the state house, which caused a far-left group to react and shoot the pastor of their church. This the first time I've heard about political violence in my city, and the groups are normally on the opposite side of this issue. My town started splitting up into factions, and I began to feel like I was in an actual civil conflict. I remembered what this group had told me and decided to give their theory a try. I found Dave and promised him a meal at my place. I drugged him, put him in car, and brought him back here. The next couple days I saw both groups disband. People in the town lose interest their factionalism, and my sister's sentence was cleared as a mistrial. My family was awarded $500,000 for the mistake. Maybe it was naive, but I became a believer pretty quick, and even more so once I saw what happened when the others went through similar trials. So you are a part of this now? That's part of the deal. You make the choice, then you torture him. I torture him mentally. He thinks I'm his lover, who's also a prisoner, and every few months I make him think we're escaping only to bring him back here. I hate it, but using my energy to keep his in check is now my biggest priority. But the leader chimes in, and now you're a part of it as well. You have seen him, and whether you like it or not, must partake in his torture. Now come, you need to take in your duty. He grabbed my hand and pulled me to what appeared to be an aberration made by the art department of The Exorcist. He was bloody, pale, and missing teeth. His hair was mangy and missing clumps. The man wasn't even shaking. It was like he felt reserved to his fate. Now please, make the choice. How will you torture him? How will you utilize your negative spirit? We'll give you 20 minutes. The group walks into a side door and leaves me to my decision. I wasn't about to get inducted in this cult. I didn't care if I were risking my life. I needed to save a human from a fate worse than death. I grabbed the knife off the table, cut his ropes, and tried to pull him up. Come on, I'm getting you out of here. The man could barely stand after being tied up for so long, and I had to act as a crutch. We made our way to the door I came from. I had to be cautious as I wasn't sure if the cult had backup in the hallway I came from. I peeked out and noticed a couple robed members at the end of the hall. They were hard to make out in the dark, but I could see them, and luckily, they were on the opposite side I came from, so I shuffled with this dude toward our exit. I was curious as to why their security was this lax, considering the nature of their crimes. I guess entropy really takes its toll. We made our way in the stairwell to the main hospital where we sat for a few minutes. "How long have you been in here?" "I don't know." He seemed listless. I couldn't blame him. "Are you from this area?" "I'm not sure. I've been here for years. I barely remember what happened the day I was taken. I don't have much a grasp on time anymore." "These guys really do this to you all these years?" "It's been rough. It hasn't all been brutal. Sometimes I get a week off to recover, but I think that's so I can feel the pain fresher. They pretend to be my friend, then crack me a bunch, then I wake back on the table." We sat there for 30 minutes just talking about his situation and where he wants to go. I received a text from my wife. Her mum's health took a turn for the worse. She wasn't texting like she normally did. She told me she might take her own life. Just as I was about to message her, my brother texted me about how most of the houses on his block are foreclosing and his neighbors are becoming homeless. His house is safe, but people are demanding to stay there. He is contemplating leaving as the neighborhood is becoming chaotic. At this point, my anxiety had gone to overdrive. I'm not superstitious, but the coincidence was ridiculous. "Come on, let's get a move on." I helped him up when I got a ping on my phone. My wife tried to kill herself. It was then that superstition took hold. But this guy isn't getting tortured because my family is in pain. I couldn't do that to anyone, no matter the cost. If this thing was real, I'll just kill myself. I took us through the hole that led back to the main hospital when I received another text. My brother got stabbed by his wife. This was understandable. She was stressed. We were walking in the hallway that led to the exit, and I got a text from my wife's sister. My wife, apparently, had a contagious blood disease that had begun to infect the hospital. Their family was quarantined. "Hey, wait, there was odd security. Let's go back this way." I had taken the dude back to the room. The cult was standing there waiting. "You were quicker than most. Most people spend at least another 20 minutes pretending they're going to save him while they make up their mind." "Shut up, this is horrific." "We've all had to make the decision. It cannot continue if a newcomer doesn't make the choice. The members pull the fella up and tie him. Now, you must make the next move." He hands me a knife. The first cut must be the most painful. When I was a kid, I loved catching bugs. I'd catch them in jars, butterfly nets, and sometimes with my bare hands. I'd watch spiders spin webs between my fingers. I was never bothered by buzzing wasps or bees circling my lunch. I'd never been stung, and I never felt threatened. Maybe I was just a stupid kid, but I figured that live and let live was the only way to be. I was 8 years old when my family went on a trip. First to my aunt, then on to my grandmother. My aunt lived in this rural Minnesota town in the middle of nowhere. We were just staying for a couple of days before continuing east. When we got there, we'd been driving for 6 hours straight. I'd been car sick the entire time and hadn't been able to eat or drink a thing. It was the hottest week of the summer, leaving me dehydrated and exhausted. And, of course, my parents were fighting about it. They were fighting from the moment they stepped out of the car. I tuned it out. I could tell from the sound of their voices it was going to be a long one. "The kid says he's fine, so he's fine," my dad complained. "I told you we should have stopped for a milkshake." Mom groaned. "He's going to be sick all night." "And you think putting dairy in him is going to fix that? Come on." "So we're just going to let him suffer? Is that it? Is that your solution?" "Yes, of course. Yes, I love making him suffer. That's the best thing. I love it so much." It kept going back and forth. I picked up my backpack and unfolded a couple of Spider-Man comics that I'd read at least 8 times over. I wandered off to get away from the car and the noise, watching my aunt coming out of the house to de-escalate. I plopped down on a rock in the backyard. letting my stomach settle. I'd always hated cars, and being stuck in one on a hot summer's day for 6 hours, it was torture. As the sounds of nature washed over me, I started to feel like a person again. A breeze in the wind, a faint flutter of birds. They sang different songs out there. Diving back into the adventures of Miles Morales, I heard the familiar buzz of an insect. Looking up, I saw something I'd never seen before. Now, this was a long time ago, but I'll never forget it. It looked like a wasp, but had much more prominent antennae and a bigger abdomen. And the color, it wasn't yellow, it was a bright red. It had landed on one of my aunt's blue garden sunflowers, making the colors clash. I'd never seen an insect like it before. Looking back at my parents' car, I knew I had a jar or two hidden away there for just such an occasion. I was gonna catch it. Then again, I didn't want to risk losing sight of this thing. So I did what I'd always done when I saw something I wanted to catch. I used my hands. I approached, inch by inch, cupping my hands. The thing just sat there, head turned sideways to look at me. It didn't move, not even a twitch. I slowly closed my hands around it, plucking the top of the flower as I did. I stood up and walked back to the car, putting one careful foot in front of the other. Dad had gone inside to make a sandwich, while my mom and aunt stayed by the car, now having a sort of second-hand argument. What kind of person refuses their child a bottle of water? Mom scoffed. What kind of person is that? I tried to get her attention, but she was in full rant mode. My aunt, ever the diplomat, tried to calm her down, to no avail, of course. Mom, I repeated, can you get the jar from the trunk? It's a bottled water, she continued. It barely costs the price of the bottle. Is his time so valuable that it overpowers ours? That it consumes the time of those around him? Mom. Then, a burn. Ice pushing through my skin, digging into the vein of my arm, like my own pulse was working against me, to wound me. I dropped the flower, screeching like a wounded animal. All of a sudden the fight was over. Dad ran out. Mom scooped me up in her arms. They brushed my hair, kissed my forehead, and assured me how everything was going to be okay as I bawled my eyes out. And the red wasp thing, it was just gone. According to my aunt, all I'd had in my hand was that flower. I got a bad reaction to it. I was sweating, and it felt like my ears had this filter to them, as if the world was hidden behind a glass bubble. I could hear my parents arguing again. My dad wanted to take me to the hospital, while my mom argued that calling an ambulance would be faster. Meanwhile, my aunt was getting me some of her allergy medication, basic antihistamines. I must have collapsed. I woke up to an unknown man shining a flashlight in my eyes. A paramedic. He asked me to follow the light with my eyes. I did, but the moment I tried to move my head, I got this ache in my neck. Looks like a bad reaction, he said, but he's all there. We could bring him in, but I think some rest and ice cream ought to do it. You sure? My mom chimed in. No sign of infection, just a bit of redness, the man said as he turned my hand around. It's your call, but yeah, he'll be fine. Neither of my parents were convinced, but they couldn't decide on what to do, so they just went with his recommendation. My aunt tucked me in right there on the couch, putting on an X-Men movie for me to watch in the background. They spoiled me with ice cream and did me the courtesy of keeping their arguments short and hushed. Later that night, the house was silent. Whatever had gone through me had passed, and I was left wide awake in a sleeping house. My aunt slept on a futon down the hall while my parents stayed in her bedroom. I tried to work the remote to put the movie back on mute, but I couldn't get it to work. So once again, I resorted to reading my comics. I counted the seconds, hearing the tick-tocking of a clock from the kitchen. There was some light coming in from a large window to my left. It wasn't a great view or anything, just flat farmland for as far as the eye could see. I settled in for a long and boring night, hoping I could fall back asleep sooner rather than later. But as I read, there was a dark splotch on the page, a shadow coming from the window. Looking up, I could see one of those red wasps outside the window. I got up and walked over to it. Even then, I didn't feel threatened by it. The pane of glass between us helped. I tapped at it with my finger, and it didn't move. I shifted my finger a little to the left and tapped again, and it followed, tapping a little all over. It seemed to follow wherever my finger moved. I did a couple of zigzags, just for fun, and made it do a little jig. I couldn't help but to smile. It looked funny. "You didn't want to hurt me, huh?" I whispered. "Right." I could feel a warmth in my arm, a reminder of the sting, but also a sort of reassurance. That sting was as bad as it would get. A part of me felt that if it were to happen again, it wouldn't be nowhere as bad. "You wouldn't," I concluded. "You're a good guy." I spun my finger in a circle, and the red insect followed suit. What a funny little guy. We decided to stay an extra day to give me some time to recover. Dad didn't mind. Any excuse to spend less time with his mother-in-law was a blessing. My mom and aunt spent some time at a nearby flea market while Dad and I watched scary movies that I promised not to tell Mom about. We'd just finished Jaws when Dad had to go make a call for work. As I wrapped a blanket around me, one of those red wasps crawled up my leg. At first I was a bit startled, but it just kind of sat there, antennae poking around like little feelers. "Sorry," I whispered. "Didn't see you there." It crawled across my leg and up my arm, ending up on my thumb, facing my index finger. It seemed to follow my finger as I wiggled it, like a cat staring down a toy. I played with it for a couple of minutes. As I did, I noticed a couple of shadows cast on the coffee table next to me. Looking up, I could see about a dozen more red insects on the window, every single one of them moving with the twitch of my index finger. "You understand, don't you?" I whispered under my breath. "You get it." And while they couldn't speak, I knew I was right. As our time at my aunt's place came to an end, our trip resumed. My aunt was coming along, so I had to share the back seat. Dad was back behind the wheel, and my mum was the ever-loyal co-pilot, armed with an ever-present armada of suggestions. My aunt had brought this thick book of word search puzzles for us to play with. I was dreading it. I didn't want to get car sick again. I tried my best to prepare, but there was just no right way to do it. If I ate something, I would feel like a shaken soda bottle all day long. If I didn't, I'd feel like I had a knife rattling in my empty stomach. There was just no way to win. My mom always urged me to try some home remedy kind of thing, but it never worked. No yogurt, no chewing gum, no warm soup. Nothing worked. But that day, as we went on our way, I was fine. There was this warm, tranquil heat spreading throughout my body that it calmed me. No matter how much the car shook, or how powerful the glare of the sun stung my eyes, it's as if a shield had passed over me. I was fine. This was fine. I'd see the red wasps every now and then throughout the day, a couple of them on a fence at a rest stop, one of them resting by my foot in the car, a couple more crawling across the sunroof. I rarely had to look for long before I'd spot one or two, and they didn't seem to bother anyone. Maybe I was the only one who noticed them. I'd play a little with them, making them follow my finger around, or fly in a circle. It's as if there was a sort of quiet understanding between us. And without the constant car sickness, I was in a better mood than usual. It seemed to spread to everyone in the car. Hell, even my parents stopped arguing, if only for a bit. I was leaning my head against the window, watching the sun slowly set. We weren't far away from our destination. We'd stopped for dinner at McDonald's earlier, so this was the home stretch. A single red wasp was stuck to the window, tapping its antennae to match the rhythm of my finger. I was trying to blink away a creeping tiredness, not really paying attention. As we slowed down for a four-way stop, something jolted me awake, a feeling asking me to take a closer look out the window. A car going down the left lane, about to pass a red light, crashing right into us. I called out to my dad, who stepped on the brakes. We managed to turn just as the car passed us at 75 miles per hour, inches from our bumper. Looking down at my feet, one of the red wasps curled around the tip of my shoe. They had done this. They'd helped me. They really were my little friends. We arrived at my grandmother's place, but for the next few days, I was busy exploring my strange and sudden friendship with my newfound companions. They seemed to have followed me. I'd see them swarming outside the window where I slept, or around my dirty clothes, or my shoes. Sometimes one would land on me and just hang out. I made a little game out of having one of them zigzag between my fingers, like a coin trick. It was magical. I felt like a superhero, and if I just slowed down for a bit, I could almost hear them. Not with words, but intention. They'd point out interesting things. They'd warn me of danger. Hell, if I wanted to, I could direct them to attack. I could, but I wouldn't. But in my heart of hearts, by God, I knew I could. It'd be so easy. And somehow, no one seemed to notice, almost as if they kept out of sight for everyone else. It all came to a point when I was out walking with my mom. She was a smoker, but my grandmother refused to allow smoking anywhere near her house. So Mom had to step away. She took this time to bring me along for a walk along the beach. It became a little ritual. As we passed by a patch of high grass, I got that feeling again, not as a warning this time, but an invitation. Mom was busy with her cigarette, so I stepped away to look out over the grass. It didn't take me long to spot them, dozens of little red dots coming my way. Within seconds, they were swarming me. It was a bit startling, but harmless. They danced around me, crawling across me in patterned lines, a harmonious buzzing resonating with the warmth spreading from my arm. I went deeper into the grass, feeling more and more of them congregate around me. They wanted me to go further, away from Mom and all the others. We could go have fun. They'd take care of me. They promised. And I believed them. There was a scream, somewhere off in the distance. Something covered my face. The gentle buzzing turned into a raging, chaotic noise storm. I was grabbed and dragged, and it sounded like my mom was getting stung. She was screaming for my dad. Her screams turned to wheezing coughs, and I didn't see a thing. I was lifted off the ground as I lost all control. More people screaming, fabric being waved around. I could feel the buzzing growing, frustrated and panicked, trying to reach for me. Then, a door slammed. I was in a bathroom. I could hear my grandmother desperately caring for my mom just outside as my aunt called the emergency services. I was stuck in the bathroom with my dad, who was brushing my arms and taking off my shirt. I didn't understand what was going on. He said something about getting ointment as he threw open the door and hurried into the kitchen. For a moment, it was just me. I looked in the mirror. At first, I didn't recognize myself. It didn't look like me. My skin had taken on a reddish tint. I had insect bites all over and swelling mounds all over my arms and neck. But looking down, it didn't hurt. I hadn't even noticed. It seemed that I was the only one who wasn't in a complete panic. They'd stung me. They'd been stinging me this whole time, and I hadn't felt a thing. Standing there, looking into the mirror, I could feel them. They wanted me to go back outside. They demanded it. They were so desperate for me to come back to them that they would do anything to make that happen. I started to realize just how bad things were about to get. They weren't going to stop. Never. My dad came back in with a blanket soaked in cold water, which he wrapped around me. He also had a kind of eucalyptus ointment that he smeared across my neck. My mom was groaning in the other room, clearly in pain. Before I had the chance to ask, my dad said, "She's going to be okay. We got to focus on you." I nodded. As I did, I could hear my aunt yelling. Before I realized what she was saying, my dad closed the bathroom door and tried to cover the cracks with towels. I could hear little buzzing taps against the door. I could feel how desperate they were, how angry they were. If I wasn't coming out, they'd hurt people. All these people. And then me. There was no way to explain or rationalize it. I tried to find words, but they were drowned out in panicked yelling. I tried to focus, but it felt like my head was crackling with impressions. I hadn't even noticed how my dad had poured me a bath. I got in without questioning it. I was sure he had his reasons. Looking back at it, I think it was a way for him to make sure I was safe from the wasps. But in that moment, I didn't know what to think. Besides, thinking had started to hurt. "Stay here," he gasped. "I'm gonna help your mom." And with that, he was out the door. I was safe, for now. I leaned back, letting my ears dip below the surface of the water. Even then, I could hear my pulse and the buzzing of wings as I closed my eyes and focused. That feeling in my bones became clearer. Finally, there were words. "Come out. Come to us. Leave. Run. Be free." As clear as day. I'd feel thumps of pain across my body as I imagined myself as one of the wasps, slamming into the door. I'd feel their rage as they attacked. I'd feel my limbs being torn as they were swatted away. I'd twist and turn in my bath as I imagined myself being crushed, biting, stinging, raging against whatever I could to attack, to kill, to reach. Years later, my father would describe to me what he'd seen. From his point of view, he'd seen me having a seizure in the bath, trying to stab at him with an invisible knife, all the while repeating out, out, out. What happened next is unclear to me. A lot of it was told to me afterwards by my parents. But in the moment, I was out of it. The ambulance couldn't get to us, so they had to drive me to the hospital. Dad rolled me up in a bathrobe, hurried out to the car, and got me in the back seat. My mom had been stung about a dozen times, but it wasn't life-threatening. Still, she needed to get checked out as well. That ride to the hospital could have gone either way. All I remember is blinking in and out of consciousness. The strangest little details, like the feel of the car seat texture rubbing against my legs, the smell of cigarettes on my mom's breath, my aunt's hairspray, and the color of my grandmother's painted nails. All of it mixed with sparks of something else. My head getting crushed against the windshield, the pain in my limbs as I tried to hang on to the side of the car. Things that obviously weren't happening, but in a way they were. I was experiencing some other strange symptoms. I was sweating something that can best be described as a mild adhesive. My eyes were swelling, pressing against my skull. My tongue had turned a sudden white, and my veins were so discolored you could see the blood pump through them. I don't remember being admitted to the hospital. I don't remember being put on a ventilator or being given allergy shots. And still, just like that night at my aunt's house, I woke up somewhere in the middle of the night. I remember a terrible ache and an itch in my eyes. It was a dark room where my mom and dad were huddled up in the corner. They were out cold, probably exhausted from the whole ordeal. But there was someone else in the room too. Not my aunt or grandmother. The large thing, the other. It was standing by the door. The warmth I'd felt was almost gone, but what little I had left in me had a direct connection to it. A thread connecting it to me. It looked like a person in a sort of coat, but I knew it wasn't. It was pretending. This was not human. In the brief glimpses of understanding that we shared, I saw fields of maggots raising an entire countryside, laying waste to corn, cotton, rye, wheat, everything and anything. Creatures growing in meat, like seeds in the soil. Lines of hundreds of people, baking in the sun, ready to burst with ravenous life. Screams in the night, stopping suddenly, as a sickeningly sweet smell filled my senses. The thing came closer. It was asking me to accept. It was a threat, a promise, and an expression of adoration, all at once. We could be friends, best friends. It'd been like me. Before I even knew what to think, it was all silent. What little warmth I'd had left in me was gone. Two pale orbs reflected the blinking lights from the machine that kept me breathing, as unconsciousness took me away. A final thought, sadness. It took me months to recover. I had strange allergic reactions to seemingly random things for weeks on end. One day it'd be peanuts. The next day it'd be peaches or common soap. I'd get rashes. Parts of my hair would fall out. They'd have to extract these inch-long stingers from my arms and slather me with disinfectant. But over time, it all went away. I think the only thing that stuck around was an allergy that my mom contracted to tobacco smoke. Or maybe she just began associating smoking with the most stressful day of her life. Either way, she quit cold turkey. I've always admired that. My dad does too. Now, it's been over 2 decades since that summer. Looking back at it, it all seems like this distant other world. Something that happened to someone else. It has been hard to convince myself that it was, actually, real. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in an accident. A cable at work snapped, whipping straight across the workshop, smacking against a shelf. As it whipped back, it struck me across the left arm, leaving an inch-deep gash in my arm. And I swear to whatever gods may be, a little red wasp crawled out. The same first one that had stung me on that warm summer's day, over 20 years ago. I have never been a person who's kept many close relationships. It's never been my nature to let people into my life. I've always taken stock in being an observer, getting to know people from a distance. This trait is what led me to become so enmeshed in Monica's life. Monica Stevens and her husband Dylan were my neighbors and my landlords at my new apartment. I had just moved to the city from my small town, mostly to find work, but it didn't hurt that there were many more people watching opportunities here than at my previous residence. My apartment was not lavish by any stretch, but it was perfect for me. I lived on the top floor, a view of the rooftop garden from my kitchen, and my bedroom window was directly across from the Stevens kitchen window, as they lived just 2 doors down. Although I'd tried, I could never get a view of their bedroom, as their thick, blackout curtains were shut tightly at all hours. For the first week after I moved in, I learned the Stevens routine. Each morning, Monica would already be at the kitchen table by the time I woke up at 6. She'd sit, her chin propped up against her palm, head buried in her book, and long blonde curls falling in front of her face. It was so cute. When Dylan got up, I could tell she stiffened at his presence. Immediately, he'd begin to berate her. I could see the spittle fly from his mouth as he slammed her book shut, grab his keys, and walk out the door. This was an almost daily occurrence. If he was not screaming in her face, he would sit across from her silently, eat a bowl of cereal, and disappear out the door. When he left, he would not come back again until dinner. I don't know what he would do during the day, but I never cared to find out. He was probably cheating on Monica, that pig. Plus, if I followed him, it would be less time I could spend with my beautiful girl. Hour after hour, Monica would sit at that kitchen table, unmoving. Poor thing was paralyzed with fear. I hadn't known her that long, but I knew I could never let her stay with this asshole. When Dylan got home, he'd walk in and pick her up from her chair and take her to the bedroom. I could hear his insincere apologies, just saying sorry in hopes he'd get laid. They come out an hour later, him placing her back into her wheelchair. I'd watch Monica sit with her back to my window while her doting husband cooked dinner. He cooked in seeming silence, not speaking to her or even acknowledging her presence. It baffled me how that troll could treat a woman of that caliber with such carelessness. Although I could never get a clear view of her face, I could tell she was beautiful, shy, and that he didn't love her like I did. He was so controlling. His wife never left the apartment complex, let alone feel safe enough to even move from the kitchen table during the day. The only time she could come out was Saturday morning. When would I see her on the rooftop garden? I knew she wanted me to save her. After observing their routine for around 2 weeks at that point, I could pinpoint exactly when I could corner Dylan. The morning I planned to confront him, there was a change in the usual routine. While Dylan was in the middle of his screaming session, he struck the back of Monica's head. This sent her forehead slamming down onto their wooden kitchen table. Let me tell you, This set me off. The rest of the routine remained unchanged, as at 7 a.m. exactly, he would leave their apartment and head for the elevator. Following him, I left at 7:01 so I could catch the elevator right before it closed, wanting to seem nonchalant. I smiled when I walked into the elevator and introduced myself, stating that I was sorry for not formally introducing myself since moving in. I hadn't interacted with him directly when I had signed the lease, just his property manager. He gave me the side eye, so I confidently stuck out my hand to shake his. He grabbed it finally, his tarnished silver wedding ring cold on my hand, and said, "Yeah, I'm the landlord, Dylan." I told him I had noticed his wife's affinity for gardening and asked if she'd like some company next time. I know, a little early to get to talking about Monica, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I couldn't spend any more time exchanging pleasantries with this asshole either. That's when something strange happened. He turned to me and grabbed my forearm, squeezing so tight that it was painful. He shoved me forcibly against the elevator wall and said, "Listen, bitch, I know you've been stalking my wife. She wants you to leave her alone." The elevator door dinged and opened. He let go of my arm and walked straight out without another word. Straight through the complex doors to his car and drove off. I stood shocked. What the hell was that? But I had gotten what I came for, and that was all that mattered. That whole "leave her alone" was such an obvious lie. It confirmed to me that she needed my help. Dylan was becoming more unhinged by the day, and this episode in the elevator was proof. I went straight back up to my apartment, already thinking of what I was going to do on Saturday morning when she got to that garden. It was already Friday evening by the time Dylan got back from his daily escapades. I dreamed of her that night, about finally turning her around, seeing that gorgeous face that was no longer hiding from Dylan, professing my love, and running away together. We'd get a cottage so she could garden but live near the city so we could people watch together. We'd both be free and happy. Saturday morning came, and I woke up early to prepare my things. When Dylan woke up, he went immediately to find Monica in the kitchen. He lit into her first thing. It was too muffled to hear exactly what he was saying, but loud enough that I could hear through their closed window. I could see her distress. She couldn't even lift her head to defend herself. This poor, beaten-down woman was counting on me, but it wasn't too much longer now. Dylan forcefully grabbed her wheelchair and wheeled her out of the apartment, heading for the roof. I watched as he dumped her there, screaming a final time, saying, "You can just rot out here. I don't even care anymore." Dylan disgusted me. I wished I could rush up there and take her away right then. However, I knew I had to wait for Dylan to depart if I wanted to avoid a confrontation. Half an hour later, I approached the elevator so that I could reach the rooftop garden. As the elevator rose, I took a deep breath. Was I going to do this? Confess my love to this married woman and propose that we run away from her abusive husband together? I guessed so, because a moment later, I was stepping out from the elevator and into the small hallway that ended with the final obstacle between me and my love. As I approached the door that led on top the roof, I felt the hot summer air begin to seeping in. I turned the knob and stepped onto the bright roof. There she was, Monica. That silky blonde hair was instantly recognizable. It had fallen and covered her face slightly so that she couldn't quite see me approach. I walked over slowly as I didn't want to startle her, but then my emotions took over. I grabbed her shoulder, spun her around and closed my eyes right before I professed my love. But I got no response. I mean, nothing. Not a screw you. Not an I love you too. Silence. I opened my eyes, expecting to meet the eyes of a beautiful woman. Instead, I gagged. She had no eyes. They were gone. No eyebrows either. They were replaced with thick, black stitches that held her eyelids together. Her eyes were completely sewn shut. My eyes traveled down to her nose. She had a maggot hanging out of her right nostril, and it turned to crawl into her left one. She was a repulsing pale color with burst veins littering her skin. Then down to her mouth. It was sewn as well, and her lips were gone, ripped off her face. Her mouth was sewn into a line. No smile, no frown, completely straight and emotionless. Beyond that, her legs were completely gone. I was expecting her to have been intact. I mean, I knew she was in a wheelchair, but her legs looked like they had been sawed off. They were jaggedly rotting, not being cauterized of anything. I couldn't look anymore. I ran to the hallway leading back to the elevator, vomiting once I had gotten the door shut behind me. I ran to my apartment where I deadbolted the door behind me and sunk down into a fetal position, sobbing. I felt indescribable loss and anger. What had he done to my beautiful future wife? He mutilated her, and he thought I was going to let him get away with this. I had no weapons beside a massive hammer from an old toolbox I had under my sink. I stalked my way to the Stevens apartment and broke the doorknob off with the hammer, kicking the door in. I wanted to avenge my love. The apartment had an atmosphere so grotesque, so depraved, so much more disturbing than I could have ever imagined. I walked into the door and smelt rotting flesh seeping from the walls. The only light came from the singular kitchen window, the one I had stared into so many times, the one I had never imagined would hold this horror lurking in the spots I couldn't see. Right by the window, just out of the view I could see from my apartment, was a meat hook, and there in the dim apartment hung Monica's left leg. He was going to eat her leg. I nearly puked on the kitchen table. I couldn't bring myself to leave, though. No matter how much my brain said to run, my feet kept taking me further into the apartment. I entered their bedroom. Dried blood splatter stained the walls and floors. It looked fairly faded. How long ago had he killed her? I knew it hadn't been long, but I believed that the whole time I had been living in this apartment, she had been dead. I gazed into my apartment window as I re-entered the kitchen, imagining how untainted my mind had been just hours ago. I began to panic. I wanted to call the police. I had impenetrable evidence against Dylan. Not only was Monica slumped over on the roof, but his apartment was a striking and completely incriminating crime scene. Before I attempted to get help, I knew I had to get Monica somewhere safe. I started my way out of the kitchen, making my way back to the front door. But then a voice rang out from just outside the front door. "What the hell?" Dylan yelled. He broke the routine. I had no chance of running. I ducked back into the bedroom and slid quietly into the attached bathroom. I could hear his thudding footsteps grow closer and closer as he threatened. "I have a gun. Whatever creep is in here, I have a gun." It was time for me to avenge Monica. I heard him enter the bedroom. I gripped the hammer in my hand, charged out of the bathroom, and swung. I hit him directly in the left temple. He screamed, contorting with pain. I dropped the hammer and fled back to my apartment, adrenaline carrying me the whole way there. All I could focus on was getting his blood off me. When the police searched the apartment, they were in shock at the scene. It wasn't me that called them, but another tenant down the hall. By the time I was finished washing myself and disposing of my bloodied clothes, Monica had been found by police. Coroners came and wrapped up her frail body. They lifted her up and she was gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye. 2 days later, I went to her closed casket funeral. It was a fairly publicized affair, being how brutally tortured she had been. I stood in the back, and after the burial, I left. My car packed with everything I owned. I left the city. I still dream of her, of dancing in the kitchen, of how our lives could have been, of her beautiful sewn face. Monica, you're going to love my new place. It's the cottage we've always wanted. I can't wait to pick you up soon. See you then.